My name is Mitchell, 32 years old, and I've been silently supporting my father financially for 3 years while enduring his endless praise of my brother. Every family dinner was the same, Scott's achievements celebrated while mine were footnotes. But last night when Dad said those words with such dismissal in his eyes, something broke inside me. I pushed my chair back, stood tall, and said what I'd bottled up for years. Mom's face turned ghost white when the truth about rent payments spilled out. Before I get into how my entire family dynamic imploded that night, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever had to deal with family who can't see your true value. Growing up in suburban Boston meant snow-covered driveways in winter, Red Sox games in summer, and a childhood defined by constant comparison. Our colonial-style house with its peeling blue paint and creaking porch steps wasn't just a home. It was the arena where my parents' competitive parenting style transformed two brothers into unwilling rivals. Scott, my older brother by 3 years, possessed everything that seemed to matter in our household. He had our father's athletic build, natural coordination, and that magnetic charisma that drew people to him effortlessly. By 14, he was already being scouted for high school baseball teams. By 16, colleges were sending letters. His bedroom walls disappeared beneath trophies, medals, and newspaper clippings, his indivisible evidence of his worth that our father would proudly show visitors. I was the younger son, built leaner, more thoughtful. While Scott dominated playing fields, I found my place in classrooms and libraries. My report cards showed straight. As my science projects won, state competitions and teachers called me gifted. But in our household, academic achievements collected dust in drawers, while athletic trophies claimed center stage. Our mother, Sarah, with her patient smile and nervous hands, attempted to be the family peacekeeper. She'd slip magazine articles about famous scientists under my door, whisper, "Congratulations," when I brought home academic awards, and remind me that different strengths are still strengths, but never loud enough for my father to hear, never firmly enough to change the family dynamic. Robert, my father, had been a promising college baseball player whose professional dreams ended with a shoulder injury during his senior year. The sports scholarship that had been his escape from his own working-class family suddenly vanished, leaving him with student loans and a degree in physical education he never fully used. He opened a sporting goods store that struggled for 20 years before finally closing. Each of his failures seemed to intensify his determination to see Scott succeed where he couldn't. "Mitchell, come watch your brother's game," he'd call every weekend, but never once asked anyone to attend my debate competitions or chess tournaments. When I won the state science fair in 10th grade, his only comment was, "That's nice, but you should really get outside more. Look how pale you're getting." The financial stability in our family collapsed 5 years ago when my father's sporting goods store finally went under, crushed by large chain competitors and his refusal to adapt to online sales. The bankruptcy wiped out their savings, and at 58, my father found himself working part-time at one of the very chain stores that had put him out of business. His humiliation was palpable, his depression evident in the slumped shoulders and vacant stares during family gatherings. Meanwhile, I had been quietly building my career in digital marketing. Starting as an entry-level content writer at 24, I'd worked my way up to senior marketing director by 30, with a salary that afforded me a comfortable condo and healthy investment portfolio. Scott pursued his baseball dreams, bouncing between minor league teams, always on the verge of his big break, but never quite getting there. The family narrative remained unchanged, though. Scott was still the star with unlimited potential, while my stable career was just playing it safe. The arrangement began 3 years ago, when my father called me late one night, voice shaking as he admitted they were 3 months behind on rent and facing eviction. Just a temporary loan, he insisted, until things turn around. I paid their back rent and security deposit for a smaller apartment that same week. The next month, when no repayment came, I quietly paid again, and again, until it became an unspoken arrangement. "Don't tell your mother," he'd insisted, and definitely not Scott. It would kill me for them to know. So I kept his secret, transferring $2,000 each month directly to his landlord, while he maintained the fiction that his part-time job and occasional coaching gigs covered their expenses. The weekly Sunday dinners became increasingly difficult to endure. While I wrote the checks that kept a roof over my parents' heads, I listened to my father praise Scott's latest tryout or potential contract. My recent promotion was dismissed with a quick nod, while Scott's possibility of moving up to AAA baseball dominated an hour of conversation. Each dinner left me with a tightness in my chest that took days to dissipate, but I kept showing up out of some sense of duty that was becoming harder to justify. I told myself I was being the bigger person, the responsible son. In reality, I was enabling a pattern that was slowly destroying me from the inside. Last Sunday's dinner was supposedly special, a celebration of Scott finally signing with a minor league team affiliated with the Chicago Cubs. Mom had prepared all of Scott's favorites: pot roast with carrots and potatoes, homemade rolls, and apple pie for dessert. The small dining table in their apartment was covered with a tablecloth they usually reserved for Thanksgiving, and Dad had even bought a bottle of champagne. What no one acknowledged was that 2 days earlier I had called my mother to share my own news, a major promotion to executive marketing director that nearly doubled my salary and gave me a team of 20 people to manage. When I arrived at their apartment carrying a bottle of wine and still riding the high of my achievement, there wasn't so much as a congratulatory mention. The apartment always made me uncomfortable, not because it was modest, but because I knew every inch of it represented my unacknowledged financial support. The fresh paint in the living room, I'd paid for that. The new refrigerator humming in the kitchen, an anonymous gift when their old one died. The very chairs we sat in had been delivered after I noticed my mother wincing from the broken springs in their previous set. Dad was already halfway through his second beer when I arrived, his cheeks flushed with excitement as he clapped Scott on the shoulder repeatedly. "My boy's finally on his way," he announced, as I hung my jacket by the door. "The Cubs organization. Can you believe it?" "That's great, Scott," I said sincerely, because despite everything I did want my brother to succeed. "Congratulations." Scott nodded his smile, seeming a little strained around the edges. At 35, he was hitting the age where even he must have realized his chances of making it to the majors were dwindling. This contract was likely his last real shot. "Mitchell brought wine," Mom said, taking the bottle from my hands with a quick sideways hug. "And he's got some news too, don't you, honey?" Dad barely glanced up. "What's that? You finally going to ask that girlfriend of yours to marry you?" "I don't have a girlfriend right now, Dad. I broke up with Jessica 6 months ago. A fact I'd mentioned at least twice before. Actually, I got promoted to executive marketing director. It's a pretty big deal at the agency." "That's wonderful," Mom exclaimed, but her enthusiasm echoed alone in the small dining room. "Executive, huh?" Dad muttered. "Fancy title. What do executives do exactly besides sit in meetings all day?" I felt the familiar sting but pushed it down. "Actually, I'll be overseeing all marketing strategy for our top clients, including that national sports apparel brand I told you about last month." "Sports? Huh. Maybe you can get your brother some free gear," Dad replied, immediately turning the conversation back to Scott. "He's going to need new equipment for spring training." Dinner progressed with Dad monopolizing the conversation, recounting Scott's baseball achievements from Little League through college, as though none of us had lived through those stories countless times before. Mom occasionally tried to steer the conversation toward my work or other topics, but Dad skillfully redirected each attempt. "Remember that game against Lexington High, 42 degrees and raining, and Scott pitched a complete game shutout," Dad recounted, gesturing with his fork. "That's when I knew he had what it takes." I pushed the pot roast around my plate, appetite diminishing with each bypass of my existence. Beside me, Scott at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, interjecting occasionally with "Mitchell was doing important stuff back then too, Dad." But these weak attempts at inclusion only made it worse somehow, like being awarded a participation trophy while someone else took home the championship. "The thing about sports," Dad continued, pouring himself more wine, "is that it builds character, shows what a man is really made of when the pressure's on." I felt something inside me beginning to crack. "There's pressure in my job too, Dad. Last month I handled a crisis that saved our client millions in potential losses." Dad waved his hand dismissively. Sure, office stuff. But it's not the same as performing physically when it matters, is it? Not the same as having people counting on you, watching your every move." The crack widened. My team counts on me. My clients count on me. And apparently so does your landlord. A flash of warning crossed Dad's face, but he pressed on, either not registering my comment or choosing to ignore it. Scott's going to be playing in stadiums with thousands of people watching. That's real pressure. That builds real character. And what character is that exactly? I asked, my voice tightening. Dad looked directly at me then, his expression hardening. The kind you've always lacked, Mitchell. The kind that comes from pushing yourself to the absolute limit, from not taking the easy road. Robert, Mom warned quietly, noticing the dangerous territory we were entering. But Dad was on a roll now, loosened by alcohol and emboldened by Scott's latest achievement. You know what your problem's always been. You're too soft. Always have been. Taking the safe route. The cushy office job. The regular paycheck. Each word landed like a physical blow. 32 years of similar comments had created bruises that never fully healed, and he was pressing on every one of them. You're not half the man your brother is, he finally said, the words falling into a sudden silence at the table. Never have been, never will be. Something inside me snapped. Not with a dramatic crash, but with the quiet finality of a thread that's been stretched beyond its capacity. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping against the linoleum floor. Then he can start paying your rent, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Mom's fork clattered against her plate. Rent. What rent? Dad's face drained of color so quickly I thought he might pass out. Scott's confused expression shifted between us, trying to piece together what was happening. The $2,000 I transferred to Westside Property Management on the first of every month. I continued, unable to stop now that the dam had broken. The money that's kept this roof over your head for the past 3 years? The easy road that's paid for everything from your car repairs to Mom's dental work? Mitchell, please, Dad began, but his voice had lost all its previous authority. No, I said, standing fully now. You wanted to talk about being a man. A real man acknowledges the help he receives. A real man doesn't tear down his son while cashing his checks. Mom turned to Dad, her face a mask of shock and betrayal. Robert, is this true? You told me the coaching jobs were covering our expenses. Scott sat frozen, his celebration dinner now in shambles around him. I can explain, Dad started, but there was nothing to explain. The truth lay exposed between us like a body at a crime scene. I'm done, I said, grabbing my jacket. Find another solution. I'm sure your star son can help you figure it out. I walked out, ignoring my mother's pleas to stay and talk things through. The cool night air hit my face as I slammed the apartment door behind me, my hands shaking so badly, I nearly dropped my car keys in the parking lot. As I drove away, the magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. 3 years of silent support ended in 3 minutes of brutal honesty. I wasn't sure whether to feel liberated or terrified by what would come next. My apartment felt unnaturally quiet when I returned that night. The sleek modern furniture and minimalist decor that usually brought me comfort now seemed to emphasize my isolation. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, something I rarely did on work nights, and sank into my leather couch. My phone had been buzzing consistently since I left my parents' apartment. 12 missed calls from Mom, 3 from Scott, and a string of text messages that I couldn't bring myself to read. Dad's name was conspicuously absent from the notifications. I silenced the phone and placed it face down on the coffee table. The bourbon burned pleasantly as I swallowed, providing momentary distraction from the hurricane of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Memory fragments from childhood surfaced unbidden. 10 years old, winning the school science fair with a project on renewable energy, rushing home to show my parents, only to find them watching Scott's baseball game highlights my blue ribbon relegated to, "We'll look at it later." 16, making National Honor Society. While Scott got suspended for skipping classes, yet somehow my father managed to turn the dinner conversation to Scott's batting average improvements. 22. Graduating summa cum laude from college, my father attending the ceremony, but leaving immediately after to catch Scott's doubleheader, missing my department's reception where I received a special achievement award. Each memory carried the same weight of invisibility, the same message: you don't matter as much. You never will. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, and I woke Monday morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The face in my bathroom mirror looked unfamiliar. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, a day's stubble on my jaw. I considered calling in sick, but decided work might provide necessary distraction. At the office, my colleagues immediately noticed something was wrong. My assistant Jennifer asked twice if I was feeling okay, and during our morning team meeting, I caught myself staring blankly at the presentation slides, completely lost in thought. "Mitchell, your input on the Carson account." My boss's voice snapped me back to reality. "Sorry, just considering all angles." I mumbled quickly, pulling together some coherent thoughts on our approach. By lunchtime, I'd checked my phone again. 5 more missed calls from Mom, her voicemails becoming increasingly desperate. "Mitchell, please call me back. I had no idea about any of this. We need to talk." "Mitchell, your father isn't telling me anything. Please, I deserve to know what's been going on." "Mitchell, I'm worried about you. Just let me know you're okay." Scott's messages were angrier, more accusatory. "What the hell was that about last night? Call me back. You couldn't have picked another time to drop this bomb. Thanks for ruining everything as usual." His final voicemail, left around 3 in the morning, had a different tone altogether. "Look, I didn't know, okay? About the money and stuff. Dad never said anything. We should talk. Call me." My father's silence spoke volumes. No calls, no texts, no attempts to explain or apologize. Just the void that had always existed between us, now wider than ever. After work, I stopped by my friend Jason's apartment instead of going home. We'd been friends since college, and he was one of the few people who knew the full history of my family dynamics. "You finally said it out loud," Jason remarked after I recounted the previous night's events. He handed me a beer and sat across from me in his cluttered living room. "Can't say I'm surprised it happened eventually." "I shouldn't have done it like that," I said, though without much conviction. "Mom was blindsided." "Maybe Jason agreed, but your dad gave you no choice. And honestly, man, this arrangement was toxic from the start. You were enabling him to keep treating you like garbage while being financially dependent on you." "He's still my father," I replied automatically, the programmed response of a lifetime. "Being your father doesn't give him the right to devalue you for 32 years, Jason countered. "You know that, right?" I nodded slowly, but decades of conditioning don't disappear overnight. Somewhere deep inside, the voice still whispered that I'd failed some essential test of loyalty, that a better son would have endured the disrespect indefinitely. That night, I made the decision to temporarily block my family's numbers. I needed space to process my emotions without the constant barrage of messages making me second-guess myself. I sent Mom a brief text. "First, I'm okay. Need some time. We'll call in a few days." Then I hit the block button and felt immediate relief mixed with guilt. The next day passed in a similar fog. Work provided structure, but little focus. Colleagues were giving me space, clearly sensing something major was happening in my personal life. I stayed late at the office, reluctant to return to my empty apartment where thoughts and memories waited to ambush me. Around 8 in the evening, alone in my office, with the city lights twinkling outside my window, I finally acknowledged the truth that had been building for years. The family dynamic was broken beyond repair, unless something fundamentally changed. My father's treatment wasn't going to improve with time or patience or more sacrifice on my part. The pattern was set, and I had been an active participant in maintaining it. The realization brought unexpected clarity. I couldn't control my father's behavior or force him to value me differently, but I could control my own actions, set boundaries, and refuse to participate in my own diminishment any longer. Financial support with strings of emotional abuse attached wasn't helping anyone, not my parents, not Scott, and certainly not me. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel guilty about the prospect of stopping the monthly payments. If that meant my parents needed to downsize further, or my father had to find additional work, so be it. They were adults who had made their choices just as I was now making mine. When I finally went home that night, I slept without interruption for the first time in years. 3 days after the disastrous dinner, I was heating up leftover Thai food in my microwave when my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the peephole, I saw Scott shifting uncomfortably in the hallway, wearing his faded Red Sox cap and the leather jacket he'd had since college. My first impulse was to pretend I wasn't home. We hadn't spoken directly since the dinner, and I wasn't sure I had the emotional energy for what would inevitably be a difficult conversation. But avoidance had been my strategy for too long, and look where that had gotten me. I opened the door. "You weren't answering your phone," Scott said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I blocked everyone's numbers," I replied. "Needed some space." He nodded like this. Made perfect sense. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside wordlessly, allowing him into my apartment. Scott had only been here once before for a housewarming party when I first bought the place 2 years ago. He looked around now with new awareness, taking in the expensive furniture and original artwork that my salary afforded me. "Nice place," he commented, hands stuffed in his pockets. "Looks like the executive life is treating you well." There was an edge to his voice that immediately raised my defenses. "If you came here to continue Dad's commentary on my career choices, you can leave right now." "That's not why I'm here," Scott said quickly, then sighed heavily. "Look, can we sit down? This is weird enough already." We moved to the living room, Scott taking the armchair while I sat on the couch. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, 30-plus years of competition and missed connections, making small talk impossible. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Scott finally asked. "About paying their rent all this time?" "Dad asked me not to," I replied simply. "And you just went along with it, for 3 years." Something in his tone ignited my anger. "Don't you dare make this about me somehow doing something wrong. You have no idea what it's been like." "You're right, I don't," Scott shot back. "Because nobody told me anything. I've been going about my life thinking everything was fine, that Dad's coaching gigs were paying the bills, that you were just doing your office job thing, and then suddenly I find out my brother's been bankrolling our parents, while Dad treats him like crap. How do you think that feels?" "Probably better than being treated like crap while bankrolling our parents," I retorted. Scott ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "That's not fair, Mitch. I didn't know." "Would it have made a difference if you did?" I challenged. "You've never exactly stood up to Dad on my behalf before." The accusation hung in the air between us. Scott's expression shifted from defensive to something more complex, guilt maybe, or realization. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I never did." The simple acknowledgement caught me off guard. I'd expected more resistance, more of the deflection tactics our family had perfected over the years. "Do you know what it's like?" Scott continued, his voice different now. "Being the favorite. It sounds great, right? Everyone wants to be the golden child, but it comes with this pressure, this constant expectation that you can't possibly live up to." I snorted. "Cry me a river." "I'm serious, Mitchell. Dad projected all his failed dreams onto me. Every game, every season, every tryout, it wasn't just about me playing baseball. It was about me succeeding where he failed, redeeming the family name or some crap." Scott leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You got ignored, which is terrible. But I got this spotlight that burned. Every mistake, magnified. Every setback, a family tragedy. For the first time, I considered my brother's experience from his perspective, rather than through the lens of my resentment. What would it be like to carry the weight of our father's vicarious ambitions, to know that your value was contingent on athletic performance that would inevitably decline with age?" "The minor league contract," I said slowly. "It's not as great as Dad made it sound, is it?" Scott gave a hollow laugh. "It's barely above minimum wage. No guarantee I'll ever move up. At my age, I'm practically a relic in baseball years. But Dad's acting like I just signed with the Yankees for $10 million. "Why do you keep doing it then?" I asked. "Playing, I mean." "Because it's all I know how to do," Scott admitted. "And because—" He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Because it's the only way Dad values you," I finished for him. Our eyes met in perfect understanding. Different as our experiences had been, we were both trapped in the same dysfunctional system, desperately seeking approval from a man incapable of giving it unconditionally. "When did we stop talking to each other?" I asked quietly. "Really talking, I mean. We used to be friends when we were kids." "Before Dad made everything a competition," Scott replied. "Before I became the athlete, and you became the brain, and suddenly we weren't just brothers anymore. We were these roles." The truth of it struck me deeply. Our father's issues had not only damaged his relationship with each of us individually, but had erected barriers between Scott and me as well. We'd been robbed of a brotherhood reduced to competing characters in our father's narrative of success and failure. "I'm sorry I never noticed what was happening to you," Scott continued. "All those achievements, those promotions. I should have paid more attention. And I should have seen past my resentment to understand what you were going through too," I admitted. "Dad's got issues, Mitch. Serious ones. After you left Sunday night, Mom completely lost it. Started demanding answers about the money, about why he'd kept it from her. He just shut down. Wouldn't say a word. Just sat there staring at nothing." "That doesn't surprise me," I said. "His pride has always been his biggest problem." "It's more than pride," Scott argued. "It's like his whole identity collapsed when his store failed. He doesn't know who he is without baseball and without being the provider. It's pathetic, but it's also sad, you know." I did know. Despite everything, I still remembered the father who had taught me to ride a bike, who had built bookshelves for my growing collection of novels, who had once been capable of kindness before bitterness consumed him. "So what now?" Scott asked. "Are you really cutting them off financially?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Part of me wants to force Dad to face reality, but then I think about Mom." "We need to talk to them," Scott said, with unexpected decisiveness. "Both of us together. No more secrets, no more enabling Dad's behavior. If they need financial help, it should come from both of us with clear boundaries." "You can afford that on your minor league salary?" I asked, skeptically. "I've been coaching youth baseball on the side," Scott admitted. "And I've got some savings. Not much, but enough to contribute something. It's time I stepped up too." For the first time in years, perhaps decades, I felt like I was truly seeing my brother, not as the favored rival or the golden child, but as another adult trying to navigate the damage of our upbringing. "Together, then," I agreed. "We'll talk to them together." As Scott left my apartment that night, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mitchell, I've always thought you were twice the man I am. You built something real while I've been chasing Dad's dreams. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done on a baseball field." The words healed something in me that I hadn't realized was still broken. We arranged to meet at our parents' apartment the following Sunday, 1 week after the explosive dinner that had shattered our family's carefully maintained facade. Scott and I agreed to arrive together, presenting a united front for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. The drive over was quiet, both of us lost in thought about what lay ahead. "They know we're both coming, right?" I asked as we parked outside the apartment building. "I told Mom," Scott confirmed. "Dad knows too, but he's been practically mute all week, according to her." The apartment felt smaller somehow when we entered, as though the absence of pretense had physically shrunk the space. Mom greeted us with obvious relief, hugging each of us too tightly, her eyes red-rimmed from what had clearly been days of crying. Dad sat in his recliner, looking older than he had a week ago. The confident, opinionated man who had dominated family conversations was nowhere to be seen. This version of our father seemed diminished shoulders, hunched eyes downcast. "Would anyone like coffee?" Mom asked, the forced cheerfulness in her voice painful to hear. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Mom," Scott said gently. "We're here to talk about what's been happening." We gathered around the small dining table, the same one where everything had fallen apart 7 days earlier. Mom kept glancing anxiously between us and Dad, who still hadn't spoken a word of greeting. First, I began. "I want to apologize for how I handled things last Sunday. Mom, you deserve to know the truth, but not like that." "Why didn't you tell me, Mitchell?" she asked, tears immediately forming. "All this time you've been paying our rent and I had no idea." "Dad asked me not to," I replied, looking directly at him. "He said it would be temporary, just until things turned around. Then it just continued." Robert, Mom turned to him. "Is that true? You've been lying to me for 3 years about our finances." Dad finally spoke, his voice rough, with emotion or lack of use. "What was I supposed to say, Sarah? That I couldn't provide for my own family? That my younger son had to bail me out because I'm a failure?" "You're not a failure because you needed help," she countered. "You're only a failure because you lied about it to me, your wife of 40 years. And because you continued to treat the person helping you like he was worthless," Scott added, surprising me with his directness. Dad's head snapped up, eyes flashing with a hint of his old defensiveness. I never said Mitchell was worthless. You said I wasn't half the man Scott is, I reminded him quietly. While I was paying your rent, while I was keeping you from eviction, while I was silently supporting this family financially for years. It was easier for Dad to keep pretending I was the success story, Scott interjected. Because my success was his success, right, Dad? My baseball career was the extension of yours. Mitchell's achievements were always his own, something you couldn't take credit for or live through. The insight was so accurate, it seemed to physically impact our father, who recoiled slightly in his chair. That's not true, he protested weakly. It is true, Mom said, her voice stronger now. I've watched it happen for 30 years, Robert. I tried to compensate to make Mitchell feel valued, but I never directly confronted you about it. That was my failure. The acknowledgement from my mother, that she had seen what was happening but hadn't intervened strongly enough, brought a lump to my throat. I lost everything, Dad said suddenly. My store, my savings, my self-respect. Do you know what it's like to work for minimum wage at 60 years old, taking orders from some 25-year-old manager? Do you know what it's like to fail so completely? Actually, I do, Scott replied. Every time I didn't get called up to the majors, every time a younger player got selected over me, every time I saw the look of disappointment on your face when I called with news that wasn't quite good enough. And I know what it's like to succeed and still be treated like a failure, I added. To double my salary and have it dismissed, to support my family financially and be told I'm taking the easy road. Dad's face crumpled, decades of pride and resentment giving way to something raw and vulnerable. I didn't know how to value what you do, Mitchell, he admitted. I never understood it. Baseball sports, that was something I comprehended. Your world of marketing and business strategy, it was foreign to me. Easier to dismiss than to admit I couldn't grasp it. That's no excuse for how you treated him, Scott insisted. No, it's not, Dad agreed, surprising us all. It's just, come the truth. I was jealous, if you want to know. Jealous that you made something of yourself without my help or guidance. Jealous that you didn't need me. I did need you, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Not your money or your career advice, just your approval, your recognition, some sign that you were proud of me too. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. I've always been proud of you, Mitchell. Always. There's something else you both should know, Dad said, looking down at his hands. The reason we needed so much financial help, it wasn't just the store failing. Mom tensed beside me. Robert, don't. They deserve the truth, Sarah. All of it. He took a deep breath. I developed a gambling problem after the store closed. Sports betting mainly. It started small. $20 on a baseball game to make watching it more interesting. Then bigger bets to try to recoup losses. Before I knew it, I was in deep. That's why we fell behind on rent originally. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Suddenly, many things made sense. The occasional unexplained absences, the times when household items mysteriously disappeared, the increasing desperation beneath my father's bravado. Are you still gambling? Scott asked directly. Dad shook his head. Not for about 2 years now. After Mitchell started paying the rent, I realized how far I'd fallen. Been going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings in the next town over. Your mother's been driving me. I looked at Mom in surprise. You knew about the gambling. I found out about a year after it started, she admitted. Made him promise to get help. But we were already in so deep financially by then. Why didn't either of you ask for help openly? Scott demanded. We're family. We could have faced this together. Pride, Dad said simply. Damned foolish pride. I thought about all the unnecessary suffering, all the secrets and lies that had compounded our family's problems rather than solving them. The anger I'd been carrying began to transform into something more complex, sadness for what we'd all lost through poor communication, and perhaps a glimmer of hope that honesty might finally allow for healing. Here's what's going to happen, I said, surprising myself with my calmness. I'm not going to keep paying the full rent indefinitely. That arrangement isn't helping anyone. But I'm willing to provide some support with conditions. What conditions? Dad asked, a hint of his old defensiveness returning. First, complete transparency about finances from now on. with all of us. Second, you both need to look into senior housing options that would be more affordable long-term. Third, I want regular updates about your Gamblers Anonymous progress. And I'll contribute what I can too, Scott added. It won't be much on my current salary, but something monthly to help ease the burden. We don't need charity, Dad began automatically. It's not charity, I interrupted firmly. It's family supporting each other through difficult times, with respect and honesty. Mom placed her hand on Dad's arm. We need to accept help, Robert, the right way this time. The conversation continued for hours, painful truths emerging from every corner of our family history. Dad's childhood with an alcoholic father who never showed affection. Mom's regrets about not standing up more forcefully over the years. Scott's admission that his baseball career had been more about pleasing Dad than following his own dreams. My own acknowledgement that my resentment had sometimes caused me to distance myself when I could have been building bridges. By the time Scott and I left that evening, nothing had been fully resolved. Decades of dysfunction couldn't be fixed in a single conversation. But something had shifted. The secrets were out. The patterns had been named. And for the first time, all four of us seemed willing to see each other as flawed, complex humans, rather than the roles we'd been assigned in our family drama. As we walked to the car, Scott nudged my shoulder lightly, a gesture from our childhood that I hadn't felt in 20 years. We did good in there. I nodded, emotionally exhausted, but strangely lightened. First step of many. Think anything will really change, he asked. I don't know, I answered honestly, but at least we're not pretending anymore. That has to count for something. 6 months passed, bringing changes I couldn't have imagined that explosive Sunday night. Spring turned to summer, and with the changing seasons came a transformation in my personal landscape as well. The promotion I'd received before our family confrontation proved to be both challenging and rewarding. My team of 20 looked to me for leadership and vision, and for the first time in my career I found myself mentioning my accomplishments without minimizing them. The habit of downplaying my success, developed through years of having it dismissed at home, gradually began to fade. 2 months after our family meeting, I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Rachel Thompson. Initially reluctant to discuss family matters with a stranger, I soon found our weekly sessions became anchored points in my journey toward healing. Childhood patterns don't disappear overnight. Dr. Thompson reminded me during one particularly difficult session where I'd found myself reverting to old thought patterns. You spent 32 years being conditioned to seek validation from someone who couldn't provide it. That rewiring takes time. Those sessions helped me recognize how deeply my family dynamic had affected my relationships outside the home. I saw patterns in my romantic history, choosing partners who were emotionally unavailable, overachieving to prove my worth, keeping parts of myself hidden to avoid rejection. My 3-year relationship with Jessica had ended partly because I could never fully let her in, always maintaining emotional distance as a form of self-protection. In June, I found myself drawn to Emma Carter, the new creative director who had joined our agency. Unlike my previous pattern of pursuing relationships where I felt I needed to earn affection, Emma's straightforward appreciation of my work and character felt refreshingly unfamiliar. Our first date extended from dinner to a 3-hour conversation at a local coffee shop where I found myself sharing family stories I'd previously kept buried. Sounds like you and your brother are rebuilding something important, she observed, when I told her about my evolving relationship with Scott. That relationship had indeed become one of the most unexpected developments. The wall of competition that had separated us since childhood began to crumble as we established a new tradition of monthly meetups. Just the two of us, no parents involved. Sometimes we watched baseball games, his choice. Sometimes we tried new restaurants, mine. But always we talked with an honesty that felt both foreign and overdue. During one such evening in July, Scott revealed he was considering retiring from professional baseball. The minor league life is for 20-year-olds, he admitted, as we shared nachos at a sports bar. Living with roommates, traveling on buses, making barely enough to get by. I keep waiting for it to feel worth it, but lately... What would you do instead, I asked, genuinely curious rather than judgmental. I've been thinking about coaching full-time, not just youth leagues on the side, but high school or college level. I'm good at it, Mitch. better than I am as a player at this point. You always did have a knack for explaining techniques, I recalled. Remember when you taught me how to improve my batting stance in Little League? Scott looked surprised. You remember that? It was one of the few times you weren't my competitor. You were just my big brother helping me out. He smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. I miss those moments. Before everything got so complicated. Our mother had undergone her own transformation. After the initial shock of learning about the financial deception, she found her voice in ways that surprised us all. She insisted on taking over management of their household finances, enrolled in a community college course on personal money management, and began part-time work at a local library, her first job in nearly 20 years. I enabled your father's behavior for too long, she told me during one of our now weekly phone calls. I thought I was being supportive, but I was actually helping maintain unhealthy patterns. Dad's journey proved more challenging as expected. His pride and lifelong patterns didn't dissolve easily, but small changes accumulated. He continued attending his Gamblers Anonymous meetings, earning his 2-year sobriety chip in April. After much resistance, he agreed to meet with a counselor who specialized in depression among older men, although he insisted on referring to the sessions as consultations rather than therapy. The financial arrangement evolved as well. Instead of sending money directly to their landlord, I established a transparent support system. Scott contributed $300 monthly, a stretch on his minor league salary, but a commitment he insisted on maintaining. I added $700, significantly less than before, but still meaningful. The remaining $1,000 of their housing costs came from their own income. Mom's library job and Dad's combination of part-time work and a small pension that had finally kicked in. Most importantly, we implemented a quarterly family financial meeting where all expenses were reviewed openly. These sessions were sometimes tense, particularly when Dad fell back into old habits of defensiveness, but they maintained the transparency that had been missing for years. My own relationship with money transformed as well. For too long, I'd viewed my financial success primarily as a way to prove my worth, to my family, and to myself. Dr. Thompson helped me recognize this unhealthy association. Your value isn't determined by your bank account or your job title, she reminded me repeatedly, until I began to internalize the message. I started building friendships that had nothing to do with work or achievement. Joining a local hiking group, taking cooking classes, reconnecting with college friends I'd neglected while climbing the career ladder. These relationships based on shared interests, rather than performance metrics, provided a different kind of fulfillment. Emma and I grew closer, our relationship developing at a pace that felt both exciting and grounded. Unlike my previous tendency to keep partners at an emotional distance, I found myself willingly sharing vulnerabilities, including ongoing struggles with my father. You know what I admire most about you? She asked one evening as we walked along the riverfront. It's not your career success or your intelligence, though those are great too. It's your capacity for growth. Not everyone could turn such a difficult family situation into an opportunity for healing. Her words highlighted another realization that had been forming. My family's dysfunction had shaped me, but it didn't have to define me. The very qualities my father had dismissed, my thoughtfulness, my emotional intelligence, my capacity for introspection, were strengths that enabled me to break destructive patterns rather than perpetuating them. As summer faded into early fall, I found myself experiencing moments of genuine contentment that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. Dad still occasionally made thoughtless comments. Mom still sometimes tried too hard to compensate. Scott and I still hit raw spots in our evolving relationship. But underneath these ongoing challenges ran a current of authenticity that made even difficult interactions more bearable. We were no longer performing roles in a family drama. We were flawed humans doing our imperfect best to understand each other. And somehow that made all the difference. Exactly 1 year after the dinner that had shattered our family's facade, we gathered again around a table, this time at my apartment. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of us. A new location representing our new beginning, with me hosting rather than tiptoeing around my parents' space. So much had changed in 12 months. Mom arrived first, bringing a homemade apple pie, and wearing a confidence that her new part-time career had helped cultivate. At 65, she had discovered a passion for library work that had nothing to do with being someone's wife or mother. Scott came next, recently retired from professional baseball, and 2 months into his new position as assistant coach for a local college team. The head coach says I have a natural talent for developing pitchers, he told me with quiet pride that had nothing to do with our father's validation. Dad arrived last, moving more slowly at 63 than he had a year ago, but carrying himself with a different kind of dignity. Not the defensive pride that had characterized him throughout our childhood, but something more grounded in self-awareness. The apartment felt warm with conversation and cooking smells as I finished preparing dinner. Nothing elaborate, just a simple meal shared among family. Emma had offered to join us, but I'd asked for this one dinner to be just the 4 of us, marking the anniversary of when everything changed. As we settled around the table, I caught my mother's eye and saw her glance toward the spot where I'd pushed back my chair in anger a year ago. So much pain had spilled out that night, but also so much truth. "This is nice," Mom said, looking around at my apartment. "You've made such a beautiful home, Mitchell." "Thanks," I replied, no longer dismissing the compliment as I once would have. "I like it here." Dad cleared his throat. "The promotion's working out well then. Executive director still treating you right." A year ago, I would have heard criticism or dismissal in the question. Now I recognized it as his awkward attempt at showing interest in my career, something he was still learning how to do. "It's challenging," I answered honestly. "Managing 20 people means 20 different personalities and work styles. But yes, it's going well. We just landed the Carson account last month, biggest client in the agency's history." "That's great," Mitch Scott said sincerely. "Really great." Dad nodded, taking a bite of food before adding, "Your mother showed me that article about you in the Business Journal. Pretty impressive stuff." The compliment was delivered gruffly, still not entirely comfortable on his tongue, but genuine nonetheless. A year of counseling and family discussions had slowly taught him to acknowledge achievements outside his narrow definition of success. "How are the Gamblers Anonymous meetings going?" "Dad," I asked directly. These questions no longer required tiptoeing. Our new family dynamic was built on honest communication, however uncomfortable. 3 years sober next month, he replied with quiet pride. "They're asking me to be a sponsor for a newcomer." "That's a big responsibility," Mom commented. "They must trust your commitment." "One day at a time," Dad said, repeating the mantra that had become familiar to all of us. "Some days are harder than others, but it gets easier." Scott shared updates about his coaching position, describing a talented freshman pitcher he was mentoring. The passion in his voice was evident. This wasn't just a fallback career after baseball, but a genuine calling that allowed him to share his knowledge. As dinner progressed, I marveled at how different the conversation felt compared to our family meals a year ago. No one was being diminished. No achievements were being weaponized against others. We spoke as adults with different paths, each valuable in its own right. After dessert, as we moved to the living room with coffee, Dad asked to speak. His expression was serious, and I felt a momentary tightening in my chest. Old habits die hard. "I've been working on something in my therapy sessions," he began awkwardly. "Dr. Warner calls it making amends. Not just apologizing, but acknowledging specific harms and taking responsibility." He looked directly at me. "Mitchell, I need to say this properly." The room fell silent. Mom and Scott exchanged glances but remained quiet. "I failed you as a father." Dad continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just with the financial situation last year, but throughout your life. I couldn't see your value because I was measuring everything against my own narrow definition of success. I missed out on knowing my own son because of my blindness." My throat tightened as he continued. "You are twice the man I ever was," he said intentionally, inverting the cruel statement that had triggered our family reckoning. "You built a career through intelligence and hard work. You supported your family when I couldn't. You had the courage to speak truth, even when it was painful. I'm proud of you, son. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now." The words I'd waited a lifetime to hear. They couldn't erase decades of hurt, but they formed a bridge across the divide that had separated us for so long. "Thank you," I said, simply accepting the amends without diminishing their importance. Mom wiped tears from her eyes. "We've all made mistakes," she said. "But look at us now, actually talking to each other, actually listening." "It's still not perfect," Scott acknowledged. "We still hit rough patches." "Perfect isn't the goal," I replied. "Honest is the goal. Real is the goal." As the evening wound down, we found ourselves sharing memories, not just the difficult ones that had shaped our family narrative, but moments of connection that had sometimes gotten lost in the dysfunction. Dad recalled teaching me to drive standard transmission in an empty parking lot, my determination to master the clutch, despite stalling repeatedly. Mom remembered my college graduation, how I dedicated my honors thesis to her, because she'd been the one to nurture my love of reading. Scott brought up the summer we built a treehouse together, working side by side for weeks. These shared memories, once buried beneath layers of resentment and competition, resurfaced now as reminders that our family story contained moments of love alongside the hurt. The recognition didn't erase the painful chapters, but it added dimension to a narrative that had previously seemed one-dimensional. As my parents prepared to leave, Dad paused at the door. "You know, Mitchell, I think I finally understand something my own father never did." "What's that?" I asked. "That being proud of your children isn't about them fulfilling your dreams. It's about them discovering their own." The insight was delivered simply without dramatic flourish, but it represented a fundamental shift in perspective that might just break the generational pattern of conditional love. After everyone had gone, I stood at my living room window looking out at the city lights. The journey of the past year had been difficult, painful at times, but necessary. By speaking truth that night at dinner, I'd set in motion changes that rippled through all our lives, ultimately creating space for something healthier to grow. I'd learned that real strength sometimes means setting boundaries even with those you love, that enabling harmful behavior isn't actually helping anyone, that family patterns can be recognized and changed even after decades. That honesty, while initially painful, creates the only foundation solid enough to build meaningful relationships upon. Most importantly, I'd learned that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's validation. Not my father's, not my brother's, not even my successful careers. It existed inherently, requiring no external confirmation. The healing wasn't complete. Perhaps it never would be entirely. But we were moving forward with awareness and intention, replacing toxic patterns with healthier ones, one conversation at a time. If you've ever struggled with family dynamics that made you feel invisible or undervalued, I hope my story offers some encouragement. Sometimes the hardest words to speak are the ones most necessary to say. Sometimes a single moment of courage can change the course of relationships that seemed permanently broken. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in these struggles. Thank you for listening to my journey. May it help you find clarity and courage in your own.